The VO Meter. Measuring your voiceover progress. The VO Meter is brought to you by VoiceActorWebsites.com, Vocal Booth To Go, PodcastDemos.com, Global Voice Acting Academy, and IPDTL. And now, your hosts, Paul Stefano and Sean Daly.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the sneak peek of our upcoming episode on the VO Meter. We have decided, because of the embarrassment of riches we have of great guests and speakers, to bring you the interview portion in a sneak peek format before we release the full episode each month. Hopefully, it will give you an idea of what's to come in the new episode and whet your appetite, so to speak.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to our interview portion with the wonderful Peter Dickson. Known to millions simply as Voiceover Man, Peter Dickson is the best known and most sought-after voice talent in the UK and arguably the world. So Peter's voice has been featured on over 30 AAA game titles, including Fable and Kinect Sports. He has voiced over 30,000 TV and radio commercials, been the promo voice on over 60 channels, been the featured voice on over 200 TV shows, and he was the voice of the London 2012 Olympic Games beach volleyball. Please join us in welcoming Gravy for the Brain founder and voiceover deity, Peter Dickson. How are you doing today, Peter?
Hello,
it's a marathon
Peter.
just to get through your intro.
I know. I'm exhausted just listening to it. No wonder I'm tired. That is, mind you, that's been a career right there lasting over 40 years, so you've compressed it very nicely. Thank you for that wonderful intro.
Right, so you can just stop now.
I wish I could.
Leave some for the rest of us, for crying out loud.
Oh, come on.
Well, Peter, thanks so much for joining us this morning, or this afternoon for you, this morning for Sean and I, as you are in the UK. And we wanted to start out by talking about your background as a voice actor. Tell us a little bit about how you got started in the whole world of voice acting, and then tell us what brought you to founding or helping found Gravy for the Brain.
Okay, good question. Good opening question. What I would say, first of all, is that my love for voice and for all things spoken word goes back to a very early childhood, actually. When I was about 5 years old, I remember listening to my father's radio set, or radiogram, as it was known then. This was a rather elegant wooden-cased affair, inside which were impossible-sounding, orange glowing German valves, and these wonderful, fruity voices that emanated from this radio set. And I, as a young child, remember distinctly sitting at home in my living room in those early days, many years ago, listening to these voices and thinking, wow, this is just a whole different world in there. Of course, at age 5, I naively assumed that people lived inside the radio set. And so I can also remember looking through the grill to see where they were, and imagine my disappointment when I didn't see anyone. But that was what sparked my interest in radio. And so radio was my first love. And when I graduated from university, I did a degree in psychology, which has since stood me in good stead, actually, working in this industry, because there are quite a few lunatics in this world of ours that we live in. Nice lunatics, nicely mad. There's nobody I've met, actually, who's been in any way unpleasant or difficult to deal with. But that aside, I think the degree was useful. And while I was at university, I also did some work in media for the BBC. I was working part-time for them while I was a student. And then when I graduated, I joined the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, full-time as a radio reporter, and then subsequently transferred from journalism into on-air announcing. So I was an on-air talent. I was reading news bulletins. I was announcing in between programs. I was introducing record programs and shows. So that was my basic founding in voice, in using my voice. And after about 10 years, when I subsequently went to London, because this was all in Ireland where I started, then I came to London. I again worked for the BBC for about eight more years in national network radio. It was a fantastic experience. And I learnt everything I know now, a lot of what I know now, from those very formative 8 years when I was in my 20s, early 30s. And after I had had enough of that, and I definitely had enough, because I felt I wasn't learning anything new, and I wanted to explore new ways of using my voice in the corporate world and in advertising and in games and all the other things that were exploding around me at that time. It was just at the beginning of the explosion in digital media. The multi-channel environment had just come upon us. And so I left the BBC to go freelance. One of the scariest things I think I ever did. I was just recently married and had a mortgage and a house and family on the way. And I was just thinking, wow, this is a hell of a risk. But boy, was I glad I took it, because it was a matter of timing, I guess, as well. I just hit the rising wave. And I'm not saying it was easy. It was pretty difficult because back then there were fewer voices on the circuit, on the market, and they had, from what I could see, stitched it up completely. And so they were working a marketplace that was virtually shut to everybody else, which I was determined to break down that wall, of course, and managed to do that in small increments. And so, literally 40 years later, I kept pushing and got through the wall, and here I am on the other side. And it's, I'm just had the most fortunate career you could imagine. I've enjoyed every second of it. I've rambled on very long there. That's a very long sequence, but I hope it's put into context. Where I come from and what I do.
But actually, that gives us a great segue, because Hugh actually mentioned your tenacity and your passion for acting being some of your greatest attributes in sort of pursuing that work. Can you think of any other experiences or just kind of attitudes that you have that you felt were helpful for people who want to break into acting or voice acting in general?
Well, this is one of the reasons why Hugh and I both set up Gravy for the Brain, the online mentoring education platform, because we both felt that not enough was being done in that area for people. There were ad hoc courses here and there. Of course, there are excellent voice coaches. And I'm sure that, if you ask Hugh, he'll tell you that, those are all fabulous. And, of course, I would encourage people to do one-on-one coaching. But the problem with that is that it's not always suitable for everybody at the initial stage of their career, or even if they're just considering dipping their toe into the water to see if they like it. So because of the financial barrier that presents, because it is one-to-one coaching is and can be, a relatively costly exercise, because you're engaging in other professionals' time. And again, not to say that that's not worth it, but it is worth it when you get to the stage where you need to have it. But in the initial stages, we felt there was a gap in the marketplace for identifying a business that would help people get into voiceover and show them all the various components and aspects of it and teach them the basic rudimentary skills and show them what's required. And whether or not that's for them, then they can then make that decision later on down the line, having spent a relatively small sum of money, to then go on to seek one-to-one experience and training and mentoring with other professional people around the world. So that's why I started it. As for personal attributes, I think you definitely need to have a thick skin, because part of the stock in trade of voice artists, in fact all actors, voice actors as well, is the ability to withstand constructive criticism and rejection. And believe me, if you can't take constructive criticism and direction, then this is not the business for you, because every day, all of us, and I include myself in this, as you do, I'm sure, Sean, and as you do, Paul, we get rejected on a regular, almost hourly basis for most things that we do. But it's more than made up for by the occasional times when the client says yes. So I always say to people, you've got to be prepared to be tenacious, you've got to be ambitious, you've got to have a thick skin, and you've got to be creative in your business approach as well. Many years ago, when I started as a freelancer, I used to sit and wait for the phone to ring. I had an agent back then. I was very fortunate. I got an agent early on. I thought, well, I've made it now. I'm going to sit here and wait for the phone to ring. And I was, yeah, you're laughing now. I can hear why.
Oh, we've talked about it on the podcast many times.
Yeah, I was disabused. How naive was I? The phone didn't ring. It rang very occasionally. And I remember on many occasions, picking up the phone and ringing my agent to see whether they were still in business, which was seems like a reasonable thing to do. But at the end of the day, no, you have to make your own opportunities. Your agent is there to support you and to negotiate contracts for you when you get them, and indeed also to put you forward for jobs. But the main bulk of the work I think, for all independent freelance voice artists must come from yourself. You have to self-start, you have to self-find work. That work, of course, can be then subsequently handed over to your agent for negotiation, and believe me, that can be very worthwhile, particularly if you're starting out and you don't really know the true rate or the worth of the work that you're being asked to do. So those are the qualities I think that anybody considering a career, or indeed who has just recently embarked on a career, should certainly consider whether or not it's right for them. But so that's all I would say on that at this point.
Well, you talk about the self-starting entrepreneur attitude people have to have in order to get into the business. One of the great ways they can do that is by accessing Gravy for the Brain. So tell us a little bit about some of the specialties that Gravy for the Brain has to offer to aspiring and even veteran voice actors.
I'm glad you mentioned veteran voice actors, because there is a perception, I think, in our industry that Gravy for the Brain is just for newcomers. It is for newcomers. Of course it is for newcomers. That's, as I mentioned earlier, it's the first port of call for many people considering a career in voiceover. But Gravy for the Brain is so much more than that, as I'm sure you know, having used it and worked with it yourself. It is something that is infinitely useful to people who are already in the business and even to those who have established careers.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the VO Meter. To follow along, visit us at www.vometer.com. VO Meter is powered by IPDTL.